The courtroom was eerily silent, save for the faint rustle of papers and the occasional cough from the spectators. Rows of wooden benches were filled with curious onlookers, reporters scribbling notes, and families quietly holding their breath. At the center of it all was a young boy, no older than 10, standing nervously beside his court-appointed attorney. His dark eyes darted around the room, searching for something, or someone, that might anchor him amidst the overwhelming sea of unfamiliar faces. The boy, Malik, was small for his age, his skinny frame swallowed up by an oversized button-down shirt that seemed hastily ironed. His curly hair had been combed neatly, though a stubborn strand fell over his forehead. He looked fragile yet defiant, a child caught in circumstances far beyond his years. Malik clenched his tiny fists, his knuckles whitening as he bit his lip. He'd been waiting for this moment, rehearsing his words in his head, though the weight of the room made everything feel like a blur. At the judge's bench sat a woman with an air of authority, her eyes focused intently on the file in front of her. Judge Evelyn Parker was known for her composure, her ability to cut through emotions and focus solely on the facts. Her reputation preceded her, firm but fair, a champion for justice, especially in cases involving children. Yet, as she glanced up at Malik, something about his presence gave her pause. She didn't know why, but there was a strange familiarity about him, like a half-forgotten memory scratching at the edges of her mind. Shaking the feeling off, she adjusted her glasses and addressed the room. "Malik Williams," Judge Parker's voice rang out, steady and calm, "you've been brought here today regarding the petition for guardianship filed on your behalf. Do you understand what that means?" Malik nodded, his lips pressing together tightly. His attorney gently nudged him. "You can speak, Malik." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, his voice barely audible. Judge Parker leaned forward slightly, softening her tone. "You don't have to be scared here. This is your chance to tell the court what you want. There are no wrong answers, okay?" Malik hesitated, glancing at his attorney, then back at the judge. "Okay," he murmured, though the tension in his small body didn't ease. The attorney cleared his throat, stepping in to help. "Your Honor, Malik has expressed that he'd like to say something directly to the court today. He's been adamant about speaking for himself, despite my advice to let me do most of the talking." Judge Parker studied the boy for a moment, her curiosity piqued. "Very well," she said, motioning for Malik to step closer. "Malik, you have the floor. Take your time." The room grew impossibly quiet as Malik took a deep breath, his tiny hands gripping the edge of the podium for support. His gaze shifted from the judge to the audience behind her, scanning the faces with an intensity that seemed far too mature for a child. Then he spoke, his voice trembling but determined. "I know this might sound crazy," he began, each word carefully measured, "but I think you're my mom." The room froze. Gasps rippled through the audience, and even the seasoned court reporters stopped writing mid-sentence. Judge Parker blinked, her composure faltering for the first time in her career. She stared at the boy, her mind racing to process what he had just said. "I'm sorry, what?" she finally managed, her professional mask slipping to reveal a hint of disbelief. Malik's grip on the podium tightened as he looked her directly in the eye. "You're my mom." "I know you are." A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom, and Judge Parker quickly banged her gavel to restore order. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the gavel down. She opened her mouth to respond but found herself momentarily at a loss for words. For someone who had spent years mastering the art of control, this was uncharted territory. Malik, emboldened by the truth he had carried alone for so long, pressed on. "I didn't know for sure at first," he said, his voice growing stronger, "but I found some things. Stuff my foster family didn't want me to see. And I think you gave me away." Judge Parker's breath hitched, her chest tightening as his words landed like a blow. She felt the eyes of the entire courtroom on her, waiting for her response, but her mind was reeling. Could it be true? How could this child, this stranger, possibly think she was his mother? She had no children, at least, none that she knew of. "Malik," she said, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper, "I think there's been some mistake." "No," Malik interrupted, his eyes filling with tears. "It's not a mistake. I know it's you. You look just like me, and I remember your voice. Even if you don't remember me, I remember you." Judge Parker's heart sank, the boy's words cutting through her like a knife. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell him he was wrong, but something deep inside her wouldn't let her. A strange, unshakable feeling had settled in her chest, a feeling she couldn't ignore. Before she could gather her thoughts, Malik's attorney spoke up. "Your Honor, perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No!" Malik cried out, his voice cracking. "Please, don't make me stop. I need you to listen. I've been waiting my whole life to tell you this." The raw desperation in his voice silenced the room once more. Judge Parker stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't name. For the first time in her career, she felt powerless, caught between the weight of the law and the undeniable pull of something much deeper, something personal. As Malik's tears began to fall, Judge Parker found herself unable to look away. The boy's words had cracked something open inside her, and though she didn't understand it yet, she knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Malik's trembling words lingered in the air. Judge Evelyn Parker, usually so composed and measured, felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her. She struggled to process the boy's claim, her mind racing to find some logical explanation. Yet, as she stared into his tear-filled eyes, a strange pang of familiarity gnawed at her, something she couldn't quite explain. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the judge for guidance. The murmurs among the audience grew louder, a mix of confusion, curiosity, and skepticism filling the room. Judge Parker raised her gavel, but this time it wasn't with the firm authority she was known for. Her hand trembled slightly as she tapped it against the block. "Order in the court," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. "Please remain silent." Malik's attorney leaned toward him, whispering something meant to soothe, but Malik barely acknowledged him. The boy's gaze was fixed on the judge, unyielding in its intensity. For a moment, Judge Parker considered dismissing the claim outright, calling it the imagination of a child desperate for connection. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the conviction in Malik's voice, or the undeniable emotion radiating from him, but she couldn't bring herself to dismiss him so easily. "Malik," she began cautiously, her words measured, "what makes you believe I'm your mother?" The boy hesitated, his small hands gripping the edge of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. I didn't know for a long time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But then I found a picture. It was hidden in a drawer at my foster home. It's of you, holding a baby." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Judge Parker felt a lump form in her throat. A picture? It couldn't be possible. She had no children, no secret past that would explain this boy's claim. And yet, the determination in his voice made her question everything she thought she knew. "Where's this picture now?" she asked, trying to maintain her professional demeanor, though her voice carried an undeniable tremor. Malik's eyes darted to his attorney, who cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your Honor," the attorney began, Malik brought the photograph with him. "It's part of the evidence we intended to present in his case." Judge Parker's breath caught. Evidence? What case could possibly involve her? The lines between her professional and personal life blurred in an instant, and she found herself gripping the edge of her bench for support. "Show it to me," she said, her voice firmer now, though her heart pounded in her chest. The attorney opened his briefcase and carefully removed a small, slightly worn photograph, handing it to the bailiff. The bailiff, his expression unreadable, walked it up to the bench. Judge Parker hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo as though it might burn her. As she looked at the image, her heart stopped. There she was, decades younger, smiling softly, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a blanket. The woman in the photograph was unmistakably her. Her hair, slightly darker then, was styled in the same neat waves she'd worn in her younger years. The baby in her arms looked peaceful, its tiny hand reaching toward her face. Her first instinct was to deny it. There had to be some mistake. But the picture didn't lie. It was real. And yet, she had no memory of this moment, no recollection of ever holding a child. Panic surged through her as questions flooded her mind. How could this be possible? Was this a cruel trick? Some elaborate hoax? Where did you get this? She finally asked, her voice shaking. Malik took a hesitant step forward, his voice steady despite his tears. I told you. I found it in a drawer at my foster home. They didn't want me to see it, but I did. And when I saw your face, I just knew. It felt like I remembered you, even if I didn't know how. Judge Parker stared at the photograph, her vision blurring as emotions she couldn't name welled up inside her. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, waiting for her reaction, but she couldn't focus on anything except the image in her hands. The familiarity of the baby's face, the warmth in her younger self's smile, it all felt too real to dismiss. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely audible. This doesn't make sense. Malik took another step closer, his small frame trembling with emotion. I'm not lying, he said, his voice cracking. I know you don't remember me, but I remember you. I've been waiting for this moment my whole life. Tears welled up in Judge Parker's eyes, though she fought to keep them from falling. She wasn't the type to cry, especially not in public, but the weight of the moment threatened to break her. She wanted to reach out to Malik, to comfort him, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she had answers. The room remained deathly quiet, the tension almost unbearable. Finally, the judge leaned back in her chair, trying to regain her composure. This is highly unusual, she said, more to herself than anyone else. We'll need to investigate further. Malik's face fell, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the world had been placed on them. You don't believe me, he said, his voice small and defeated. It's not that, Judge Parker said quickly, her tone softening. It's just complicated. Malik's attorney stepped forward, sensing the need to intervene. Your Honor, if I may, he began, his tone cautious. Malik has been through a lot in his short life. He's been in and out of foster homes, never staying anywhere for long. This photograph is the only clue he has to his past. He doesn't want to cause trouble, he just wants answers. Judge Parker looked at the attorney, then back at Malik. She could see the pain in his eyes, the desperation for someone to believe him. But she also knew that jumping to conclusions without evidence could lead to even more heartbreak. Malik, she said gently, I promise we'll look into this. But for now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Malik hesitated, his eyes searching hers for any sign of reassurance. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained guarded. The judge turned to the bailiff. Have this photograph examined, she instructed. And contact the necessary agencies to verify its authenticity. I want to know everything about where it came from. The bailiff nodded and took the photograph, but Judge Parker couldn't shake the feeling that she had just set something in motion that would change her life forever. She glanced at Malik one last time before addressing the court. We'll take a brief recess, she announced, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "This court is adjourned for now." As the gavel fell, the room erupted into a flurry of whispers and speculation. Malik stood frozen in place, his wide eyes still locked on the judge. Judge Parker, meanwhile, felt as though the walls were closing in around her. The questions swirling in her mind were endless, but one thought rose above the rest: what if he was telling the truth? The courtroom slowly emptied, the hum of conversations and the shuffle of feet fading into the background as Judge Parker sat alone at the bench, staring blankly at the photograph in her hands. The picture had been returned to her for safekeeping during the recess, and she couldn't stop looking at it. Her younger self smiled back at her, the image stirring something deep within her, a feeling she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. She didn't hear the door open behind her until a familiar voice broke her thoughts. "Evelyn, you okay?" It was Thomas Carr, an old friend and the court's chief investigator. He approached her cautiously, his brow furrowed with concern. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with confusion. "I don't know, Thomas. I don't know what to think." She held up the photograph, and his expression shifted from concern to surprise as he took it from her. "Where did this come from?" he asked, studying the image carefully. "It's part of Malik's case," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He claims I'm his mother." Thomas's eyebrows shot up. But he quickly masked his surprise. "That's quite a claim. Do you think there's any truth to it?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't remember ever having a child, Thomas. But this picture, it's me. There's no denying that." And the way he looked at me, it felt so real. Thomas sat down beside her, his usual confidence replaced by a cautious empathy. "Evelyn, you've handled thousands of cases. You've seen how desperate kids in the system can get. Maybe this is his way of coping, of trying to create a connection." "Maybe," she murmured, though she didn't sound convinced. "But what if he's right? What if there's something I've forgotten?" Or, she stopped herself, the thought too overwhelming to finish. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let me dig into this, okay? I'll look into Malik's history, his foster placements, and this photo. If there's any truth to his claim, we'll find it." She nodded, grateful for his steady presence. "Thank you, Thomas. I don't think I can handle this alone." Meanwhile, Malik sat in a small conference room with his attorney, his legs swinging restlessly beneath the table. He had hoped his revelation would change everything, that the judge would embrace him and the truth would finally come to light. But instead, he was left with more uncertainty, and the waiting was unbearable. "Do you think she believes me?" Malik asked, his voice barely audible. His attorney hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I think she's trying to process everything. It's a lot to take in, Malik. You have to be patient." Malik frowned, his small hands clenching into fists. "I've been patient my whole life. Nobody ever listens to me. They just move me from one house to another like I don't matter." The attorney sighed, his heart aching for the boy. "I know it's hard, Malik. But this is a complicated situation. Judge Parker has a lot of responsibilities, and she needs time to figure out what's going on. You did the right thing by speaking up." "I hope so," Malik muttered, his voice tinged with doubt. "I just want to know the truth." Across town, another piece of the puzzle was quietly falling into place. A woman named Angela Simmons sat in her dimly lit living room, scrolling through her phone. She had spent years fostering children, including Malik, and she prided herself on doing her best for each one. But when she saw the news about Malik's claim in court, her heart sank. Angela reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a voice on the other end answered. "Hello?" "Evelyn Parker," Angela said, her voice trembling slightly. We need to talk. Evelyn froze at the sound of the name. Who is this? It's Angela Simmons. I fostered Malik for a few years. I think I might have answers to some of your questions. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. You know something about this? Not everything, Angela admitted. But I know enough to say that Malik isn't lying. The photograph he found, it's real. And it's connected to a part of your life that I don't think you ever knew about. Evelyn gripped the phone tightly, her mind racing. What are you talking about? How could I not know? It's not my story to tell, Angela said softly. But I can point you in the right direction. There's someone you need to talk to. Someone who knows the truth. Evelyn's hands trembled as she scribbled down the name Angela gave her. Thank you, she said, her voice barely steady. I don't know what to say. Just find the truth, Angela replied. For Malik's sake. And for yours. As the call ended, Evelyn stared at the name on the paper in front of her. It was a name she didn't recognize, but something about it sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew there was no turning back. Back in the conference room, Malik's attorney received a call from Thomas. We've got something, Thomas said, his tone urgent. The photo is real, and it's connected to a closed adoption case from about 10 years ago. It's not much, but it's a start. The attorney relayed the information to Malik, whose eyes lit up with hope. Does this mean she's really my mom? He asked, his voice trembling with excitement. It means we're getting closer to the truth, the attorney said cautiously. But we need more information before we can be sure. Malik nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the brink of something big, something that could change everything. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, new questions arose, each one more unsettling than the last. And as the tension built, one thing became clear: the truth, whatever it was, would not come easily. The evening air outside the courthouse was heavy with an impending storm, mirroring the tension that hung over Judge Parker as she left the building. Her footsteps echoed on the pavement as she clutched the piece of paper Angela Simmons had given her. The name written on it felt like a key to a locked door she wasn't sure she wanted to open. Still, the weight of Malik's words and the haunting familiarity of that photograph propelled her forward. Evelyn's drive to the address Angela had provided was a blur, her thoughts swirling like the dark clouds gathering above. Questions she couldn't push away filled her mind. Who was this person she was about to meet? What secrets could they hold about her past? And most importantly, could Malik truly be her son? The possibility seemed impossible, and yet it gnawed at her relentlessly. When she arrived at a small, weathered house on the edge of town, Evelyn hesitated. The porch light flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked steps. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the quiet night. A moment later, it opened, revealing an older woman with kind but tired eyes. She seemed to know who Evelyn was before a word was spoken. Judge Parker, the woman said softly, stepping aside to let her in. Angela called to tell me you'd be coming. My name is Margaret. Please, come in. Evelyn stepped inside, her nerves heightened as she took in the modest living room filled with faded photographs and worn furniture. Margaret gestured for her to sit, then disappeared briefly before returning with a small wooden box. She set it down on the coffee table and sat across from Evelyn, her expression somber. I know why you're here, Margaret began, her voice tinged with both sorrow and resolve. And I wish I didn't have to be the one to tell you this, but you deserve to know the truth. Evelyn's chest tightened. Please, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just tell me. Margaret opened the box, revealing a stack of old papers, photographs, and a small, tattered baby blanket. She picked up the blanket first, running her fingers over the fabric before looking Evelyn in the eye. "Many years ago, you were involved in an accident. You were in college at the time, a bright, ambitious young woman with your whole future ahead of you. But the accident left you in a coma for several weeks. When you woke up, there were gaps in your memory." Evelyn's breath hitched. She remembered the accident vaguely, the flashes of pain and the long recovery. But she had always believed her life had returned to normal afterward. "What does this have to do with Malik?" she asked, her voice shaking. Margaret's eyes softened with compassion. "During that time, you gave birth to a child, a boy. But you didn't know. The doctors decided it was best not to tell you, given your condition and the uncertainty of your recovery. The baby was placed for adoption almost immediately." Evelyn felt as though the air had been knocked out of her. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "I would remember something like that." "You wouldn't," Margaret said gently. "Not if it was hidden from you. The adoption was closed, and the record sealed. But Malik, he's that child, Evelyn. I'm certain of it." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she stared at the blanket and the documents in the box. She reached for one of the photographs Margaret handed her, and her heart shattered. It was another picture of her younger self, this time in a hospital bed, cradling the same baby from the earlier photograph. The resemblance to Malik was undeniable. "Why would they do this to me?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. "Why would they take him away?" Margaret sighed, her expression heavy with regret. "They thought they were protecting you. Your family was involved in the decision. They believed it was the best thing for both you and the baby." Evelyn's mind raced, the pieces of her past clicking into place with devastating clarity. The photograph Malik had found, the feelings she couldn't explain, it all made sense now. But with the truth came an overwhelming wave of guilt and grief. She had missed years of her son's life, years she could never get back. Meanwhile, back at his temporary foster home, Malik sat on his bed, staring at the same photograph he had shown in court. His heart ached with uncertainty. He had hoped for answers, but instead, he felt as though he had opened a door to more questions. His foster mother knocked gently on the door and entered, sitting beside him. "You've been quiet tonight," she said softly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Malik shook his head at first but then hesitated. "Do you think she's really my mom?" His foster mother sighed, wrapping an arm around him. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I think she's trying to figure it out, just like you are. Give her time." Malik nodded, though patience was the last thing he felt capable of. All his life, he had dreamed of finding his family, of belonging somewhere. Now, with the possibility so close, the fear of losing it all was almost too much to bear. Back at Margaret's house, Evelyn struggled to process everything she had learned. Margaret handed her the last document in the box, a birth certificate. Evelyn's name was listed as the mother, the date and details aligning with everything Margaret had said. There was no denying the truth anymore. Malik was her son. "What do I do now?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. "You do what's in your heart," Margaret said gently. "Malik needs you, Evelyn. He's been through so much. But this won't be easy, for either of you." Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. She knew Margaret was right. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She would fight for Malik, no matter what it took. But as she prepared to confront the truth, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still to come. The storm outside had grown stronger, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it reached its peak. The storm outside Margaret's house intensified, rain pounding against the windows as Evelyn sat frozen in her chair, the weight of the truth settling over her. She clutched the birth certificate in her trembling hands, the name Malik Williams glaring back at her like a beacon she could no longer ignore. Her heart ached with guilt and longing, but just as she began to consider her next steps, Margaret's expression shifted. There was something else, something she hadn't said yet. "There's one more thing," Margaret said, her voice hesitant. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she waited, sensing the tension in the air. When Malik was placed in the system, there was an incident. Something that complicates things. Evelyn leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What kind of incident?" Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting to the box on the table before meeting Evelyn's gaze. Malik wasn't supposed to stay in foster care this long. He was adopted once, by a family who seemed perfect on paper. But it didn't work out. "What do you mean, it didn't work out?" Evelyn asked, her voice rising with urgency. Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the memory. The family returned him to the system after less than a year. They claimed he was too difficult, that he had behavioral issues. But from what I've heard, the real story is much darker. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "Darker how?" Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper, as though speaking the words aloud might summon them back to life. "There were allegations of abuse, Evelyn. Physical, emotional, things no child should ever endure. By the time he was removed from that home, he was different. He didn't trust anyone. And who could blame him?" Evelyn's heart shattered as the pieces fell into place. Malik's defiance, his guarded demeanor, the desperation in his voice when he'd spoken in court, it all made sense now. He wasn't just a boy searching for his mother, he was a child who had been hurt, abandoned, and betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect him. "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking with anger and frustration. Margaret looked away, her face etched with regret. "It's not the kind of information they share freely. The system is overwhelmed, and kids like Malik fall through the cracks. He's been through so much, Evelyn. That's why he's holding on to this idea of you so tightly. You're his last hope." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. She thought of Malik sitting in that courtroom, his small frame trembling as he declared her his mother. She thought of the years he had spent feeling unwanted and unloved, and a fierce determination ignited within her. She would not let him down, not again. But just as she resolved to take action, her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, her instincts telling her this call was important. With a deep breath, she answered. "Judge Parker speaking." "Judge Parker, this is Thomas," her investigator said, his tone urgent. "I've been digging into Malik's case, and I found something you need to know." "What is it?" Evelyn asked, her heart pounding. "There's another layer to this story," Thomas said, his voice tense. "Malik's placement in the foster system wasn't as straightforward as it seems. There's evidence that someone deliberately kept him from being adopted, someone who had access to his records." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Are you saying someone sabotaged his chances of finding a family?" "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "And it looks like it wasn't random. Whoever did this had a personal reason for keeping Malik in the system." Evelyn's mind raced, the implications hitting her like a freight train. If someone had intentionally prevented Malik from being adopted, it meant there was more to his story, more to her story, than she had ever imagined. "Do you know who's behind it?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Thomas hesitated. "I'm still piecing it together, but there's a name that keeps coming up in the files, Angela Simmons." Evelyn's heart stopped. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Angela was one of Malik's foster mothers. She's the one who gave me Margaret's name." "I know," Thomas said grimly. "Which is why I think she might have been trying to cover her tracks. Evelyn, I think Angela knows more about Malik's past, and your connection to him, then she's letting on. Evelyn's grip on the phone tightened as a new wave of questions flooded her mind. Why would Angela keep Malik from being adopted? And why would she point Evelyn toward Margaret if she was hiding something? The answers felt just out of reach, shrouded in a web of lies and half-truths. I need to talk to her, Evelyn said, her voice firm. Right now. Thomas hesitated. Be careful, Evelyn. If Angela is involved in something shady, she might not take kindly to you digging into her past. I don't care, Evelyn said, her resolve unshakable. Malik deserves the truth, and I'm going to get it. With that, she hung up and grabbed her coat, ignoring Margaret's worried expression as she headed for the door. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling as Evelyn drove to Angela's house, her mind consumed with questions. She didn't know what she would find, but one thing was certain, this was far from over. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that Malik's story, and her own, was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. And as she approached Angela's house, her heart pounded with the certainty that the next revelation would change everything. Evelyn stood outside Angela's house, the wind whipping around her as rain drenched her coat. The storm was at its peak, thunder rumbling in the distance as she gathered her courage. Her heart pounded as she knocked on the door, the sound almost drowned out by the rain. Moments later, Angela appeared, her face tightening with surprise when she saw Evelyn standing there. Evelyn, Angela said, her voice faltering. I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk, Evelyn replied, her tone resolute. And I'm not leaving until I get answers. Angela hesitated, her eyes darting nervously to the street before stepping aside to let Evelyn in. The house was dimly lit, the air heavy with a tension that mirrored Evelyn's own. Angela gestured toward the couch, but Evelyn remained standing, her arms crossed as she faced the woman who had become an unexpected figure in Malik's story. I know about the adoption records, Evelyn began, cutting straight to the point. And I know you were involved. What I don't understand is why. Why would you keep Malik from finding a family? Angela's face paled, her hands trembling as she sat down. It's not what you think, she said quietly, avoiding Evelyn's piercing gaze. I never meant to hurt him. Then what did you mean to do? Evelyn pressed, her voice rising. Because from where I stand, it looks like you sabotaged his life. Angela sighed deeply, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't sabotage him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to protect him. Protect him? Evelyn repeated, her disbelief evident. From what? Angela looked up at her, the weight of years of secrets etched into her face. From the people who were supposed to adopt him. They weren't what they seemed. They had a history, abuse, neglect, and I couldn't let him go to them. So I blocked the adoption and kept him in the system. I thought it would give him a better chance. Evelyn's anger faltered, replaced by a flood of conflicting emotions. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why keep it a secret? Because I was afraid, Angela admitted, her voice trembling. Afraid that if I spoke up, no one would believe me. The system is broken, Evelyn. You know that. And by the time I realized how much damage I'd done, it was too late. Malik was lost in the cracks, and I couldn't fix it. Evelyn stared at her, the storm outside echoing the turmoil in her chest. Angela's actions, though misguided, had been born out of desperation and a desire to do the right thing. But the consequences had been devastating, not just for Malik, but for everyone involved. There's something else you need to know, Angela continued, her voice hesitant. The photograph Malik found, it wasn't left behind by accident. I put it there. Evelyn's breath caught. You wanted him to find it? Angela nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought if he knew the truth, if he found you, it might give him the hope he needed to keep going. I didn't know if you'd remember, but I hoped you'd care enough to try. Evelyn's mind reeled as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Angela's interference, Malik's discovery of the photograph, and her own feelings of unease, all of it had led to this moment. But even as she processed the truth, one question lingered. Why didn't you just tell me? Evelyn asked, her voice softer now. Angela looked at her with a mix of regret and vulnerability. Because I didn't think you'd believe me. And because I was scared. Scared that if I brought you into his life, I'd only make things worse. Evelyn sighed, the weight of everything pressing down on her. You were wrong, she said firmly. Malik deserves a family. He deserves to know he's wanted. And I'm not going to let him down. Angela nodded, her shoulders sagging with relief. I'm sorry, Evelyn. For everything. Evelyn didn't respond, her mind already racing with what she needed to do next. She left Angela's house and drove straight to the foster home, her heart pounding with a mix of determination and anxiety. When she arrived, Malik was waiting in the living room, his eyes widening with surprise when he saw her. You came back, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Evelyn knelt in front of him, her hands gently resting on his shoulders. I'm so sorry, Malik, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't know. But now I do, and I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Tears streamed down Malik's face as he threw his arms around her, clinging to her as though she might disappear. Evelyn held him tightly, her own tears falling freely as she silently vowed to make up for all the years they had lost. But just as she thought the nightmare was over, a knock at the door interrupted their moment. The foster mother answered it, revealing a stern-looking man in a suit holding a folder. Judge Parker, he asked, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. I'm with Child Protective Services. We need to have a conversation about Malik. Evelyn's heart sank as she realized the fight for her son was far from over. The man held up the folder, his expression grim. There's another name on his file, someone who's claiming custody. And they have legal precedence. The room seemed to spin as Evelyn processed the man's words. Malik clung to her, his voice trembling as he whispered, What does that mean? It means, Evelyn said, her voice steely with determination, that this isn't over. And I'm not giving up without a fight. As the storm raged on outside, Evelyn braced herself for the battle ahead, knowing that the truth had brought her this far, but the final challenge was still to come. The room felt heavy as the man from Child Protective Services stood by the door, his folder clutched tightly in his hands. Evelyn held onto Malik, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She had just found him, just uncovered the truth, and now it felt like it was all slipping away again. What do you mean someone else is claiming custody? Evelyn asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The man stepped forward, his tone professional but not unkind. There's another individual listed on his records, a man named Charles Donovan. He filed a claim for custody months ago but was delayed due to a backlog in the system. His paperwork recently resurfaced, and he's asserting his rights. Evelyn's mind raced. She didn't recognize the name, and neither did Malik, who shook his head vehemently when she asked. I don't know him, Malik said, his voice small and scared. I don't want to go with him. Evelyn's protective instincts flared. Who is this Charles Donovan, and why would he have any claim to Malik? The man hesitated, glancing at the boy before speaking. He's listed as Malik's biological father. The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the gut. It felt impossible, another twist in a story that had already stretched her understanding of the truth. Malik looked at her, tears brimming in his eyes. You're my mom, he whispered, clinging tighter to her. I don't want to go. Evelyn knelt in front of him, her hands cradling his face. You're not going anywhere, she said firmly. We're going to figure this out. Together. The CPS worker cleared his throat. There's a process that needs to be followed, he said. But given the circumstances, it's possible to contest his claim. You'll need to prove that your bond with Malik is stronger and that being with you is in his best interest. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to lose him, not now, not after everything they'd been through. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn threw herself into the fight for Malik. She worked tirelessly with her attorney, gathering evidence and preparing her case. She dug deeper into Charles Donovan's past, determined to understand who he was and why he had suddenly come forward. What she found painted a troubling picture. Charles had a history of instability, with multiple arrests and a record of failed custody claims for other children. Malik, meanwhile, stayed close to Evelyn, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They spent hours talking, laughing, and learning about each other's lives. Malik opened up about his time in the foster system, sharing stories of hardship and resilience. Evelyn shared stories of her own childhood, her career, and the accident that had taken so much from her. Slowly, they began to heal each other's wounds. The court hearing to decide Malik's custody arrived sooner than either of them expected. Evelyn stood in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the judge entered. Charles Donovan was there too, a tall, wiry man with sharp features and a restless energy. He avoided looking at Malik, focusing instead on his attorney. Evelyn presented her case with passion and clarity, detailing her discovery of Malik's identity, her growing relationship with him, and her ability to provide him with the stable, loving home he deserved. She showed the court evidence of Charles's troubled past and emphasized Malik's own wishes to stay with her. When it was Charles's turn to speak, his arguments felt hollow and disconnected. He claimed he wanted to do right by Malik, but his lack of understanding about the boy's needs was evident. The judge listened carefully, her expression neutral, as both sides made their case. Finally, it was Malik's turn to speak. The courtroom fell silent as he stepped forward, his small frame radiating a quiet strength. He looked at the judge, his voice steady despite the tears glistening in his eyes. "I've been waiting my whole life to find my mom," he said. "And now that I've found her, I don't want to lose her. Judge Parker is my mom. She cares about me, listens to me, and makes me feel safe. I don't know Charles Donovan. I don't want to live with someone who doesn't even know me." His words hung in the air, raw and powerful. Evelyn wiped away tears as she watched him speak, her heart swelling with pride and love. The judge took a long pause, her gaze shifting between Malik, Evelyn, and Charles. Finally, she spoke, her tone measured but firm. "After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, and in the best interest of the child, I rule in favor of Evelyn Parker retaining custody of Malik Williams." The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps and murmurs, but all Evelyn could hear was Malik's voice as he ran into her arms, whispering, "We did it, Mom." The weeks that followed felt like a dream. Evelyn and Malik settled into a routine, their lives intertwined in ways that felt natural and right. Evelyn watched as Malik began to thrive, his once guarded demeanor replaced by a spark of joy and curiosity. He joined a local soccer team, made new friends, and excelled in school. Evelyn, in turn, found a new sense of purpose, her days filled with the challenges and rewards of being a mother. One evening, as they sat together on the couch looking through old photographs, Malik turned to Evelyn with a serious expression. "Do you think the storm is over now?" he asked. Evelyn smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think the worst of it is behind us," she said. "But even if another storm comes, we'll face it together." Malik nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I like that," he said softly. "Together." Evelyn pulled him close, her heart full of gratitude and love. The road to this moment had been anything but easy, but it had brought them to each other. And that was all that mattered. As the evening turned to night, the house grew quiet, the only sound the gentle rhythm of rain against the windows. The storm had passed, leaving a world renewed in its wake. For Evelyn and Malik, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the unshakable bond of family. As Evelyn and Malik sat together on the couch that evening, the rain outside had turned into a soft drizzle, a calm contrast to the stormy events of the past few months. Their lives had finally found some stability, but unanswered questions lingered in Evelyn's mind. She knew that to truly move forward, they needed to address every shadow of doubt that had been cast. Evelyn leaned back and looked at Malik, who was engrossed in a book she had bought him. "Malik," she said gently, "there's something I want to talk to you about. It's important." He looked up, his dark eyes filled with curiosity and a tinge of apprehension. "What is it, Mom?" Evelyn hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "I've been thinking about Charles Donovan, about why he came forward and why things happened the way they did. I feel like we deserve to understand everything, so I've asked Thomas to help us dig into it." Malik's expression turned serious, but he nodded. "Okay. I want to know too." Over the next few weeks, Thomas continued his investigation, uncovering pieces of Charles Donovan's connection to Malik. What he found painted a clearer picture. Charles had been contacted years ago when the adoption system was struggling to place Malik with a permanent family. His name had been added to Malik's file as a last known relative, but he had initially declined to pursue custody, citing personal difficulties. However, a recent financial settlement from a legal dispute had prompted him to revisit the claim, hoping it might offer a chance to rebuild his life. When Evelyn shared this with Malik, she watched him carefully for his reaction. He sat quietly for a moment, then said, "I don't think he's a bad person. But he's not my family." "You are." Evelyn hugged him tightly. "I'm glad you feel that way, but it's okay to have mixed feelings. It's a lot to take in." Thomas's investigation also uncovered another critical piece of the puzzle, the truth about Angela's involvement. Angela had indeed intervened in Malik's adoption process, but not out of malice or selfishness. She had uncovered troubling evidence about the family who had initially planned to adopt Malik and had fought quietly behind the scenes to ensure he wasn't placed in harm's way. However, her efforts had backfired when Malik was left in foster care for far longer than she anticipated. Angela met with Evelyn and Malik one afternoon to explain everything in person. She sat across from them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I owe both of you an apology," she began, her voice trembling. "I made decisions that I thought were in Malik's best interest, but I didn't think far enough ahead. I didn't imagine the system would fail him the way it did." Malik looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You stopped me from being adopted?" "I did," Angela admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "Because I was afraid of what would happen to you in that home. But I never wanted you to feel abandoned, Malik. I'm so sorry for everything you went through." Malik's voice was quiet but firm. "I forgive you. But I'm glad I found my mom." Angela smiled through her tears. "So am I. You deserve to be happy." The final question that haunted Evelyn was about the photograph, the image of her holding Malik as a baby. She couldn't shake the feeling that its existence was more than a coincidence. After consulting with Margaret and reviewing the hospital records, Evelyn discovered that a nurse had taken the photo during her recovery. It had been included in Malik's file as a sentimental keepsake before being shuffled into storage. When Angela later found it, she recognized its significance and left it for Malik to discover, believing it might one day lead him to his mother. Evelyn held the photograph in her hands, her eyes welling with tears as the story came full circle. This single piece of evidence, hidden for years, had ultimately reunited her with her son. She placed the photo in a frame and set it on the mantel, a symbol of the journey they had taken to find each other. In the months that followed, Evelyn and Malik's lives flourished. Evelyn formally adopted Malik, erasing any lingering doubts about their bond. She stepped back from her demanding caseload to spend more time with him, rediscovering the joy of family she never thought she'd experience. Malik, for his part, began to trust the world again, his once guarded heart now open to the possibilities of love and connection. Evelyn also reached out to Charles Donovan, extending an olive branch. While Charles wasn't ready to play an active role in Malik's life, he appreciated Evelyn's gesture and promised to stay in touch. It was a small but meaningful step toward healing the fractured pieces of Malik's past. One evening, as they sat together watching a movie, Malik turned to Evelyn and asked, "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" Evelyn thought about the years of pain and loss, the twists and turns that had brought them together, and the love they now shared. "I don't know if everything happens for a reason," she said, "but I do know that sometimes, the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations." Malik smiled and leaned against her, his voice soft but filled with conviction. "I think I was always meant to find you." Evelyn kissed the top of his head, her heart full. "And I was always meant to be your mom." The rain outside had stopped completely, leaving the world quiet and still. For the first time in years, Evelyn and Malik felt truly at peace. Their story wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past would always remain, but they had found each other. And that was enough. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next.